In the autumn of 1944, World War II was raging across Europe. Allied forces were pushing deeper into German territory, while a series of brutal battles were being fought as both sides struggled for control. One battle in particular stands out as a powerful example of the ferocity of armored warfare. This is the story of the Battle of Pfullendorf, a violent confrontation between American and German armored forces that took place on November 17, 1944. If you enjoy fascinating historical stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting videos. Pfullendorf, a small German town nestled in the heart of the Rhineland, was about to become the scene of a fierce clash between massed armored forces on both sides. Its narrow streets, centuries-old buildings, and surrounding open fields created an unusual battlefield for tank warfare. On one side stood formidable German panzer formations, equipped with Panther and Tiger tanks and prepared to defend their homeland at any cost. On the other were the battle-hardened soldiers of the United States 2nd Armored Division, driving the reliable, though often outclassed, M4 Sherman tank. The M4 Sherman medium tank was the principal American tank of World War II. During the war, about 50,000 were built to supply American and Allied troops. The Sherman proved mechanically reliable and highly mobile. Like the M3 and M5 light tanks, it became a workhorse of the United States Army, providing close infantry support, spearheading armored attacks, performing anti-tank missions, and even serving as supplemental artillery. Its 75mm main gun, however, lacked sufficient armor-piercing capability. The Sherman had sacrificed some firepower and armor in exchange for improved mobility, and by late 1944, the tank was becoming increasingly outmatched despite the availability of a limited number of Shermans upgraded with the high-velocity 76mm gun. Most medium tanks continued to carry the short-barreled 75mm gun. Against the enemy's largest tanks, they were clearly outgunned. The 63-ton Tiger and the roughly 50-ton Panther both presented a serious challenge. The Tiger, Panther, and even the medium Panzer IV all possessed thicker armor plating than the Sherman. The German tanks also had larger tracks, giving them greater flotation. In certain conditions, this could reduce the advantage the American tanks enjoyed in mobility, especially when operating away from firm ground. On solid terrain, the Sherman's primary advantages were its superiority in numbers, comparatively easy maintenance, and greater flexibility in rate of fire because of its Euro stabilizer and powered traverse. During the First Army breakthrough battles in July and August 1944, tankers of the 2nd Armored Division had already learned how difficult it was to fight German Panther and Tiger tanks with their M4 Shermans. They understood that the low-velocity 75mm shells carried by most Shermans could not penetrate the thick frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers, regardless of distance. The American crews instead had to look for vulnerable areas on the sides and rear. Even with these tactics, the Americans had suffered devastating losses. For example, between July 26 and August 12, 1944, a tank battalion from the 2nd Armored Division lost 51% of its combat personnel, either killed or wounded. An astonishing 70% of its tanks were destroyed or sent back for extensive repairs. Yet through clever flanking maneuvers and the strategic use of artillery support to fire directly on enemy tanks, American forces had managed to emerge victorious from their battles, inflicting substantial losses on the Germans. When the Ruhr offensive began in November 1944, the 2nd Armored Division had improved its firepower to a certain degree. Approximately half of the division's M4 tanks were now equipped with the more powerful 76mm gun. With this upgraded firepower and the new tungsten carbide core (HVAP) ammunition, tank crews had a better chance against German armor. The ammunition could pierce the Panther's front belly plate from 300 yards away with a reasonably good chance, while the front slope plate could be penetrated at a distance of about 200 yards. But there was a major problem. The ammunition was in critically short supply. adding to the division's improved capabilities. Its tank destroyer battalion had recently been equipped with the new M36 tank destroyers, armed with the powerful 90mm gun. On the morning of November 17, 2 tank battalions from the 67th Armored Regiment of the 2nd Armored Division were preparing to attack toward Jülich from a slope outside Pufendorf. The American forces were preparing to launch their offensive toward the village. Soldiers in the 1st Battalion began observing elongated high-velocity shells cutting deep grooves into the soft earth between their tanks. Then, emerging from the thick morning mist, German tanks appeared on the scene. Soon afterward, 2 Tigers and 4 Panthers emerged from the woods on the western outskirts of Geriensweiler. The deadly exchange began. A Sherman tank was struck and erupted into flames. Then another was hit. Then another. The German crews had accurately zeroed in on their targets, and before long the tanks of the 2nd Battalion were also suffering losses under the relentless fire of the formidable German armored vehicles. The Germans had been surprised by the rapid progress of the American advance on the first day of the offensive. They quickly deployed units from the battle-hardened 9th Panzer Division, veterans of the Eastern Front, toward Geriensweiler. They were now launching an assault on Pufendorf. According to the 2nd Battalion, the German force was estimated to consist of around 20 to 30 Panthers and Tigers. The Battle of Pufendorf unfolded as a fierce tank-versus-tank engagement, with infantry forces on both sides pinned down by relentless artillery barrages. The Germans held the advantage in positioning. The Americans were restricted by the terrain, with steep slopes making flanking maneuvers nearly impossible. The Shermans fought courageously, engaging the enemy and attempting to exchange fire with their 75 and 76mm guns. But tanks that moved close enough to bring their weapons effectively against the enemy were quickly destroyed by German fire. Even when American tank crews managed to score direct hits on German tanks, their shells often bounced harmlessly from the thick armor, soaring skyward with a deafening impact. In one remarkable case, it took an astonishing 14 rounds of 76mm ammunition from a single Sherman before its crew finally discovered a vulnerable point on a Tiger. But almost immediately afterward, another Tiger tank destroyed the Sherman. A single combat report captured the brutal nature of the action. Sergeant Julian Chonsky, a tank commander in Company D, spotted a German tank and fired at it, but there was little visible impact. Meanwhile, tanks on the right flank were under heavy fire. Lieutenant Karl's tank burst into flames, yet, miraculously, all 5 crew members managed to escape unharmed. The draw was overcrowded with tanks, leaving little room for maneuvering. 2 enemy Tiger tanks and 4 Panther tanks were spotted emerging from the woods on the western edge of Geriensweiler, still shrouded in persistent mist. A veil of bluish smoke descended into the draw. 2 additional medium tanks on the right side were quickly engulfed in flames. Then, within a matter of minutes, 4 of the lighter tanks were ablaze. Some companies had dwindled to less than platoon strength, while ammunition supplies were running dangerously low. The 1st and 2nd Battalions were forced to make a difficult decision. They would disengage and retreat toward the outskirts of Pufendorf. By 1600 hours, the withdrawal was underway. During the retreat, Sergeant Chansky's tank took a direct hit, injuring him and causing the vehicle to burst into flames. The task force then regrouped in a defensive position to protect the town against a possible German recapture. Chansky's platoon leader, Lieutenant Pendleton, found himself on the outskirts of the town. His tank was parked in a lane, and his remaining ammunition was extremely limited. Only 1 armor-piercing round, 2 smoke rounds, and 6 high-explosive rounds. Then Pendleton spotted a Panther tank moving across his path. He realized immediately that he was not in a favorable position to engage it. But the crew of the Mark V tank had also spotted him. As the Panther advanced, it opened fire. Pendleton's gunner responded quickly, firing 2 smoke rounds. The smoke forced the Panzer to withdraw. But it would return shortly afterward. Pendleton responded by unleashing 4 high-explosive rounds. One of them struck the driver's hatch with accuracy. That hit was enough to convince the Panzer crew to retreat once more. The situation was becoming desperate. Some American companies had been reduced to only 3 or 4 tanks, and ammunition supplies were continuing to disappear. Both battalions urgently called for the 90mm tank destroyers to advance and provide support. Lieutenant Cecil Honeycutt's platoon from the 72nd Tank Destroyer Battalion was taking position when the Panther suddenly reappeared. It fired an armor-piercing round down the lane. The shot narrowly missed the leading M36 tank. Honeycutt reacted immediately. He swiftly maneuvered his tank destroyer into position and unleashed 2 rounds at the Panther, effectively ending the immediate threat. German forces were further deterred by artillery fire, which resulted in the destruction of 3 King Tiger tanks in a single barrage. The newly introduced M36, equipped with its formidable 90mm gun, was now facing one of its first major battlefield trials. The 90mm gun had enough power to neutralize Panther and Tiger tanks at typical combat distances. But when facing the imposing King Tiger, the situation was much more difficult. It generally required the coordinated effort of 2 or more M36 tank destroyers, and often demanded a carefully placed shot even under those circumstances. Nevertheless, on November 19, north of Friendshoven, a single M36 crew achieved the remarkable feat of disabling a King Tiger from a distance of 1,200 yards. The 90mm round punched through the side of the turret, passed entirely through the breech ring of the 88mm gun, and came dangerously close to penetrating the far wall of the turret. As the day came to an end, American tanks received orders to withdraw and seek shelter inside the stone structures of Pufendorf. Surprisingly, the Germans did not launch a counterattack. Several factors influenced their decision. They faced a shortage of infantry, their own tanks were having difficulty navigating the soggy, rain-soaked terrain, and intelligence indicated the arrival of Combat Command A of the 2nd Armored Division, along with the 66th Armored Regiment, on the evening of November 17. All of these factors contributed to the German decision to hold back. Although the Germans had failed to capitalize fully on their advantage, they had nevertheless halted the advance of the 2nd Armored Division for 2 full days. It was not until November 20 that sufficient ammunition and reinforcements arrived, allowing a successful pre-task force assault on Geriensweiler. The offensive was preceded by concentrated artillery barrages. Afterward, it took another 6 grueling days of fierce house-to-house fighting in Merzenhausen before the 2nd Armored Division finally reached the Rohr River on November 28. When the smoke finally cleared over Pufendorf, both sides had paid a heavy price. The town lay in ruins, a lasting testament to the fierce battle that had unfolded through its streets. The second day of action on the Rohr Plain took a particularly heavy toll on the 2nd Armored Division. The Americans lost 18 medium tanks and 7 light tanks, all destroyed, with a similar number damaged and rendered inoperable. The human cost was even more devastating. 56 soldiers lost their lives, 281 were wounded, and another 26 were reported missing in action. The Americans reported that they had successfully destroyed 17 enemy panzers during the engagement. The American tank crews had faced an extremely difficult situation throughout the Battle of the Rohr Plain. They were hindered by difficult terrain and muddy conditions that prevented effective flanking maneuvers. Congested areas also limited the artillery support they typically relied upon, while adverse weather restricted air support. Despite all of these obstacles, the tank crews displayed tremendous bravery. But the battle had left a deep impression on them. They had become increasingly disheartened and disillusioned about their tanks' ability to overcome German armored forces. Just 2 days after the Rohr Plain offensive, a growing sentiment could be heard among the tankers of the 2nd Armored Division. Our men no longer have the same level of trust in their armor and guns as they once did. Another soldier added that the Germans had shown continuous improvement since the American encounter in Sicily, emphasizing the need for action from the Ordnance Department to keep pace with evolving enemy technology and tactics. This was not simply a temporary reaction from soldiers exhausted by battle. After the war, a report from the Armored School, developed in collaboration with tank commanders from the 2nd Armored Division who had participated in the Pufendorf action, reached a blunt conclusion. The primary reason for the setback on November 17 was the inferiority of American tanks in terms of guns, armor, and maneuverability. During the Ruhr Plain offensive, American tank crews could not help but notice the distinct advantages of German tanks. The German vehicles had wide tracks that barely sank into the ground, while American tanks left deep trenches in their wake. The tankers expressed their grievances, arguing that the Shermans were too sluggish to quickly evade anti-tank fire. They believed that their volute spring suspensions hindered maneuverability, with many of them favoring torsion bar suspension for its superior maneuverability and reliability. They also criticized the Sherman for having a profile that was too tall and armor that provided little more protection than the tank destroyers. But perhaps the greatest frustration concerned the tank's guns. The crews had personally watched their 75 and 76 mm rounds bounce harmlessly from the frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers. To them, firing at these heavily armored German tanks could feel like trying to stop them with a pea-shooter. Although the 76 mm gun represented an improvement over the 75 mm variant, it still lacked the necessary velocity to keep the Sherman outside the effective range of the more powerful German tank guns. Those German weapons could reach approximately 3,000 to 3,500 yards with deadly accuracy. At practical combat distances, the 76 mm gun, even when firing HVAP ammunition, often failed to penetrate the Panther's glassy plate effectively. The tank commanders voiced their dissatisfaction clearly. They believed the guns were ineffective. The crews knew it, and they understood that it affected morale. They pointed toward the British approach as an example. The British had replaced the 75 mm guns on their Lend-Lease Shermans with 17-pounders, giving the vehicles a far more effective anti-tank capability. The tankers of the 2nd Armored Division firmly believed that their own Shermans could accommodate a 90 mm gun as well, offering a substantial improvement in firepower. The Battle of Pufendorf had demonstrated the price of facing German armor with weapons that struggled against its protection. American crews had fought with determination, using numbers, artillery, maneuver, and every advantage available to them. But the battle also exposed a growing technological gap. For the men inside those Shermans, the lesson was brutally clear. Courage alone could not eliminate the difference between a tank that struggled to penetrate enemy armor and one that could destroy it from far beyond effective American firing range. Pufendorf had become more than another engagement in the long campaign across Europe. It was a battlefield where American tank crews discovered, at enormous cost, just how difficult the final months of the war could become when they faced increasingly powerful German armored forces.